Hello, and welcome to all of you out there watching this video or listening to this podcast. For those of you I don't know, I'm Beth Napleton, and I am an expert in working with leaders in mission-driven organizations to reach their goals. And today is very special because I have not just one leader joining me, but two. So first, a very warm welcome to Julia Poole, my friend of many, many years, who is the founder of Burn-In Mindset, which we're going to talk about a lot, and her colleague, Jenn Beatty, who I just met the other day, and we are already famous friends. I feel like it's fair to say.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Beth. Really excited to be here.
We're going to see if we can persevere through some internet connectivity issues. So thank you for the patience if you're listening at home as well. So that'll be great. So we're excited to, in our lives on leadership, we really try and learn about the lessons of leaderships from a variety of perspectives. And so Julia and I first met in 2011, which somehow is 11 years ago, when she became an instructional leader at the Teach for America Institute that I was running. Her reputation had really preceded her as an amazing award-winning teacher. She was the 2013 DC Teacher of the Year. So that was even after I knew you, Julia. So you were a very strong teacher. You shaped other teachers. You went on to, win that accolade, and then founded Burn-In Mindset, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but is an organization focused on reducing teacher and learner burnout. And Jenn, I've been so lucky to meet you. So for those of you who are meeting Jenn like I am, not only is Jenn a consultant to Burn-In Mindset, which is how she hears today, she has not one, not two, but 3 master's degrees, and is working towards a PhD in social psychology at WashU in St. Louis, studying bias and prejudice reduction, as well as intergroup relations and power dynamics, and is also a certified Dare to lead facilitator with Dr. Brene Brown. So you guys do amazing work every day to help people do so many things. And we'll talk about some of the psychological tools out there in the research and how do you get those into the hands of regular everyday leaders and people. And we're also going to focus a lot on the work that you do with Burn-In Mindset. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we get into any details, I really am just so excited to dive in and talk a little bit generally about leadership. So I'm going to start, Julia. Now, we've never had 3 before, so we're going to see how this flows. I feel confident in this group. We can figure it out. But Julia, we met first, and you came on board to an amazing team at the 2011 Institute, which was part of a pilot to really get the top teachers we could find to teach teachers, so that not only were they learning the content, but they were seeing people who were truly masters of the craft and could use them as an exemplar. So I have really fun memories of that time, that team. We've been reminiscing about this team as we prepare for this. And so to indulge a little bit, if you had a book about your leadership journey, what would the title of the chapter be from the time that we met? Well, number one, I would buy that book. 100%.
Yes. I mean, that was such an amazing time. And so many of those people from that time period, like were at my wedding. I talked to them on a weekly or monthly basis. So an incredible team. I think the title of the book would be, or that chapter would be, Obsessed with Teaching. I mean, we were all staying up so late trying to be really good at teaching what excellent teaching was. And then we were obsessed with looking at our feedback from the new teachers. And it was a scale of 1 to 7. And so we were obsessed with the number 7. And we would talk about getting all 7s all day. And we still make jokes about that. So yeah, it would be obsessed with excellent teaching.
That is awesome. Well, and I feel like that is a really thread that translates through, right, to your work as well, like where you're really thinking a lot about excellent teaching, and also how do you keep excellent teachers teaching, which is, I think, a societal issue that we struggle with. So after our paths crossed, you were an AP and a principal in DC, and then you went to graduate school and you studied at the University of Pennsylvania with Dr. Angela Duckworth, focusing on positive psychology. And Jenn, pretty soon your story starts to weave into this. I think you both have studied some really interesting topics. Why that step, right? I think that is, I know a lot of people kind of do different things, and I know probably hundreds of educators who have read Angela Duckworth's books, and I only know a handful who have been I'm going to go devote time to studying with her and to learning about it. So I'm so curious, and I know our listeners are so curious as to what led to that decision.
Yeah. So I think there are 2 big questions that I was studying. First, what keeps excellent teachers from avoiding burnout? And then the other question that I wanted to study was, what's the role of a teacher or principal who's not a clinician in addressing mental health issues in kids? And the program at Penn was absolutely my first choice because they have a world-renowned program on positive psychology that focuses on studying things like resilience, brain plasticity, psychological safety, gratitude, and hope. And those were the types of things that I wanted to be studying to complement what at that point had been kind of a deficit-based approach to education.
And it's interesting because I think that was in like 2016, 17-ish, right? And I think it's interesting because, of course, now in the aftermath of COVID, I think a lot of us are thinking about like, what's the role of non-clinicians in helping students with mental health challenges as we go through this interesting time. So you were ahead of the curve. And so, Jen, I understand that's also where you two met when you were on faculty there together, in kind of a similar program. And you also started your career as a teacher as well. So what drew you to that program?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So I found MAP. I, similar to Julia, had a very speedy trajectory through high achievement as a teacher. And so I found myself going from winning teaching awards to all of a sudden being like an instructional leader for grades that I was a psychology and theater major in undergrad, and I was teaching English and history. And so I was really pulling on a lot of, I guess, innate talent. I didn't have the content knowledge, but I had intuition. My first master's was at Penn in the Graduate School of Education while I was teaching. So I was kind of learning how to teach while I was teaching. And it was amazing. And the more I worked with teachers, I was like, it's not as simple as like teacher plus content plus student success. There has to be more of a human-centered approach. And I was really interested in motivation, particularly in the face of stressors, and how to connect with yourself in a way where motivation can be intrinsic or something that is driving beyond these external markers. And that's what brought me to Penn. Familiar with Angela's work, familiar with Marty Seligman's work. And I was like, there has to be more to life than stress. I was like, high achievement is really amazing, and I want a more wholehearted approach. And that's, I went there to start studying motivation. And it's interesting because even in my work now, I still, motivation is one of the key threads that still is a big part of my research.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it was your second master's degree at Penn then?
Yes. Yeah. So positive psychology was my second degree at Penn in a pretty short amount of time. And it's interesting too, because people are often like, did you plan to have this educational trajectory? And honestly, I have always been very passionate about purpose unfolding. And this is one thing Angela teaches in Grit too, where it's not necessarily like I planned it out this way. And now looking back, I could not be doing what I'm doing without each of the building blocks that I took to get this way. Teaching, motivation, even my first master's thesis was a documentary film about the effects of stress on mental health for teachers and students. And in the master's I just defended in social psychology, I used those same documentary films to do social modeling, which is what I learned in education. And it was a teaching intervention. Like, it's really fascinating where nothing is wasted along the way. You just have to keep going and it will come together.
And there is so much about, I was just talking with one of my coaching clients about this, just kind of discovering, like, we don't know the path, but how do you just open yourself up, discover, let today inform tomorrow. And in retrospect, there's always a clear narrative. Just when it's going on, you don't see it. When it's unfolding, it's like, you're like, what's the next sentence? Like, we don't know. And that's part of what keeps it really interesting, right? Well, I'll throw this out to both of you. So is there anything that used to work for you in leadership that doesn't kind of quite work anymore? Something you've had to grow and adapt that maybe served you before, but doesn't serve you anymore?
I can jump in with this. I think it's a big question that I think about a lot with our clients, because we work with teachers who have a lot of experience and have quickly made it to like a high level of skill. And one of the things that is consistent with all of them is that they put a lot of energy into teaching. And early on in their careers, they're the first in the building, the last out, willing to dedicate all of their time, and almost find it more stressful to relax on the weekends than to work. And that pays off and helped them become really successful quickly. But over time, their life gets a little bit more complicated. You know, maybe their parents get sick, or they have a relationship that needs more attention to develop, or children they have to take care of. And they have to find a way to sustain their expectation for success while also building other aspects of their life. And so I think a big leadership lesson is that time and energy can be your number one resource that you dedicate at the beginning, but over time, you need to learn how to be more efficient and purposeful in where you put your energy.
Totally.
Yeah, I'll hop in here too, because it's such a good question. When I was first starting, I did Teach for America as well. So I was obviously very young. And most of what I had to go on was, okay, I was successful in school. Therefore, if I just copy paste what worked for me, then that will mean success. And I kind of carried that philosophy even when I was coaching other teachers. And that has evolved a great deal for me into this philosophy that people are really their own best teachers. You can ask therapists this, you know, therapists don't give you the answers. They ask you questions and you come up with a narrative that makes sense. And in much of the work that we do now, we're not offering these silver bullets of, you know, this is the trick that'll make it work. But we learn how to ask the right questions. And then we model what the experience was like for us so that people can abstract knowledge and lead their own lives, because they're really the only people who have the capability to do that. So I went from very much a copy paste to let's just ask some great questions and see where we get.
Totally. And I think that idea of the answer is going to be different for everyone. You are also, like, to your point, Julia, are going to have different needs at different seasons. And so how do you adjust those? And there's such a thread I hear in both of those about just being so familiar with yourself and your needs and how you succeed and what you need. Like, and sometimes, you know, clients will say, well, what's the right answer for this? It's like, well, there's not one right answer, right? It's going to be different for two different schools. It's going to be different for two different organizations. But it takes that reflection. So that's interesting. I love having these two guests. It's like to be able to pull themes is so interesting. And that was not, it's impromptu. How about another question for you guys, which is, you know, sometimes I feel like leadership lessons whisper to us over time until we learn them. And other times they like smack us in the face, right? And it's just this profound moment where you're like, that really sticks with me. It's a really sticky moment. And I learn a lesson in a really profound way. And so I'd love to hear if you all have any experiences with leadership lessons that have really stuck with you this way.
This will pick up on a similar theme. But there was actually this talk that I was listening to when I was a student in the positive psychology program. It was from Oprah, and it was in a speech she was giving. And she had this phrase, and it really, really, it was a commencement speech. And she said, when the time comes for you to bet on yourself, I hope you double down. And it has been this beacon for me throughout making really, really interesting calls, where they're not even necessarily difficult calls, but more like, how do I take two options that could both work, but they would lead to completely different paths? And sometimes often there is this inkling in myself of like which pathway to go, what to say yes to, what to turn right to. And to know that at the end of the day, I'm the best bet I can take on me, right? I can't look externally and be like, well, what do you think I should do? Or because I think you take it all in, you take in all the advice, you take in all the wisdom, but you have to live with your decisions. And that mantra has helped me do some really, really challenging things that require a ton of resilience, it's really the essence of self-efficacy, which is a belief that you can do difficult things. And so that internal belief has been a huge drive, and one I often like to share with others when they're facing something that they may not believe they have the capacity to decide within themselves.
No, I got chills when you said that. I'm like going to put that on my computer. I feel like that really speaks to me. That really speaks to me.
Yeah.
How about you, Julia?
And I will say Jenn is just, over the years, I've watched her make a lot of really brave and courageous career decisions, love decisions, life decisions, and it's a wonderful thing. And I had a client the other day ask me, like, can I trust anyone? And I was like, well, start by trusting yourself. Like, what do you think? So it's a wonderful thing to have that self-efficacy. I remember I was a first-year teacher, Hillary Lewis, who's still with Teach for America, was my principal in Gary, Indiana. And I came to her at the end of the school day crying about a problem I had had in my classroom, and knew that she would have an answer and like the right advice for me of what to work on that night before I came back the next morning. And she looked at me and she said, I need a good night's sleep before I can help you with your problem. And she walked out the door, and I was like, whoa, like, I definitely don't need to go to sleep yet. Like, I need to keep working so that I don't get destroyed tomorrow. But that is really interesting that that's the way she answered to me. And I think that it was the first clearest example to me that skilled educators that stay long-term are really good at taking care of themselves and know when to not just throw more time at a problem.
The self-knowledge there is also so expert, right? Of knowing like, oh, I've reached it and that's it.
Yeah. And she really did know herself. And I, to this day, still look back and admire that about her.
I feel like that is also advice for the ages. Will this, and it's like, will this seem better in the morning? Will I have, you know what I mean? Like, it's always, when in doubt, it usually can be solved in the morning. Usually, not always, but that's really profound. Well, another, so before we kind of get into the kind of focus area, right? But I do want to talk, I think all of us, and Jenn, I know we just met, but given that you're studying bias reduction, so I feel confident I can say this about you. And I know we're going to talk about the term bias reduction, which I think is going to be super juicy as well. But, part of why I've worked in education for so many years is because I really want to kind of move the world towards a more just and equitable place. And I think the last several years have been really interesting. We've made some good movement on this front, never quite fast enough. But really working with schools and teachers, and I think places that can really help, I believe, help accelerate, right, our universe a little bit more in this direction. I would really love to know, particularly from you, Jenn, given your area of focus, when you are thinking about where we are and where we need to be a more diverse and inclusive and equitable society. Like, what are you thinking about that's like most important, or that's moving the needle, that you're most excited about, that's going to kind of help those folks who are listening, who really want to just like keep the pedal to the metal? Like, where is the right place to be headed, and to be thinking about as we work towards equity?
Yeah. So full disclosure here, from a social psychology perspective, I'm going to offer something that might feel to someone like a psychologically or a person-focused perspective, but that's because I work at the individual level. So I am not a sociologist. I am not, I don't work at political levels or at
systems.
Systems. And that is equally important. And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years that I've grown more comfortable with is like, stay in your lane, right? Like, if we all stay in our lane, then we can all come together and really make some big differences. So I can think at the systems level, but I think of systems within individuals, and then those ecologies that exist, social psychology, so the connections between individuals. And one of the things that has been very, very exciting is the level of willingness and engagement to do things that can feel interpersonally difficult. So when we think of things like racism, sexism, all of the isms, they can be these monolithic, incredible issues that feel absolutely debilitating to try and tackle. But when we begin to zoom in and say, okay, that perspective alone isn't going to be motivating enough to do anything to change it. What can I do? And that's where I try to help shift people's perspectives and think at that level. Not that it's a panacea, but it does make a difference. And one of the things that has been very exciting for me to see is a shift in the work that we personally do at Burn in Mindset from shame, blame, all of these things that can easily become aroused to accountability, responsibility, personal ownership. So instead of me telling you where I think you were biased, how about you tell me? And how about I tell you where I've been biased? And then we have that conversation. And that mutual shared vulnerability increases bias awareness in a unique way because it's no longer abstract, it's concrete and personal. And we know from teaching, we can shift concrete understanding. Abstraction becomes much more difficult. So that has been very exciting to see that shift in really the open vulnerability of this work that it does require.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it makes me think about, in some ways, this is a tired proverb, but like the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And it's like I don't know what step vulnerability is. Maybe it's 1, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 100, but you have to have that to have the reflection. And I think the ownership and those pieces that lead to change. Right. And so that is a really interesting, it's really interesting to think about.
It's really cool too, because as you said that, a part of vulnerability is staying in it. So sometimes when you're like, oh, well, I've tried something, or, oh, I went through this, I've reflected on my bias once, I did it. And it's like, actually, the vulnerable thing is what happens when you get biased feedback after you feel like you have been working on it and you feel like you should have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it should be all mastered. Where do we go from there? And so I love vulnerability because it's this iterative, continual.
Yes, it's been again and again. Right. It's not step, right. It's step every fifth step, whatever you have to be continuously in that space. Right. And open, which I think is so important and also so hard. Right.
Yeah, so hard.
Absolutely. So we're going to zoom in now and talk about the work that you all do at Burn in Mindset. And so just to kind of set the stage, this is part of a small series I'm doing on staff culture. And the reason I'm focused on culture is because I think that, right now, leaders and mission-driven organizations have a lot going on with the learning leads from the pandemic, kind of all the mental and emotional health issues that adults and kids are having, uncertainty, there's, and not just that, right? There's the war in Ukraine is very unsettling. We have crazy hate crimes. I mean, I can think of one that happened Saturday in Buffalo and Sunday in California. It's like, this world is a crazy place and we're all living in it. And when people are leading schools or networks or organizations or nonprofits, right, there's so much important work to be done. And that work becomes infinitely harder if morale is low in an organization, if the culture is not open to feedback, if it doesn't feel like a healthy place to work, which can lead to high turnover. And so wanted to really focus in on this could probably be a year-long series, and maybe one day it will be, on kind of all the different elements of staff culture. But really the work you do at Burn in Mindset came to mind really quickly because you work so closely on thinking about those, as you mentioned earlier, Julia, those really experienced educators and leaders, and really thinking about how do you keep them in the game. And I think that when I think about the culture and the health of an organization, there are really folks who others look to. And often those are the people who have been teaching down the hall from them or who are there to share a lesson plan. And so if you can really think about their engagement and their cultural health in and their personal health as well as an organization, it can really help you set up to make sure that the overall organization is in a healthier place. So with all that to say, I'm probably messing up with a lot of that. So please correct me as it is too. So you guys really cater to experienced educators and leaders. And I would love to hear a little bit, Julia, about why that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to reiterate what you said, there are one, they're rare, right? We know that 50% of teachers quit within the first 5 years. Most leaders last 3, and they have exceptional perspective, like Jen said, and they also have instructional expertise, and they have relationships that they've been cultivating, which contributes to trust. And now more than ever, we're seeing a lot of people leaving the workforce across all sectors. And one of the main reasons why they're staying is because their work is an environment where they feel a sense of community, joy, and purpose. And that is really driven by the most experienced leaders in a building. And we know that there can be one toxic member of your team that can take down the entire culture. The reverse is true, that there can be a small subset of your staff that you can't imagine running a school without. And that's why I started Burn In Mindset. I really wanted to help schools keep their top talent. And I had a friend who was a superintendent, and I had created the program Burn In Mindset. And I said, can I try my program out on you? And he did the program, which takes about 4 weeks. And he loved it, and he hired me to work with one of his best principals. And that principal and I worked together, and also 5 of her best teachers. And we've been working together now for 4 years. And what started with just one school has now turned into us working with close to 50 schools across the country and almost 1,000 clients at this point. And our goal really is to help. It's not a one size fits all, right? But to help the experts within each excellent school stay engaged in this work long term. And a really cool example was a couple of weekends ago for Mother's Day. One of my clients sent me a text message that her 13-year-old daughter had given her, thanking her for being such an incredible mother. And she said, I wanted you to see this because our work together with Burn In Mindset has helped me model all the things that I want to for my daughter. I can keep my body healthy and go to the gym every day. My marriage is strong. I'm excelling in my career, serving the community that I want to, and get to show up for my 13-year-old girl. And that really is our goal, is to help excellent teachers stay engaged in all parts of their life and model for their own families and for their kids that they're teaching.
That is awesome. And that's also the long game, right? Like, if you feel like you can do this work, I mean, I'm sure all of us know people who at various points said, I can't do this anymore. I'm going into a different industry. I'm going into a different career. And I think about so many of our education challenges in this country. And this, I think, is a real game changer. So
yeah, I think a lot of the problems are caused, right, by certain people leaving, but they also can be solved by the right people staying. And that's the overlap of what Jen was saying is, there's system level changes that need to be happening, but they're solved by individuals at the individual level.
That's a really helpful way of thinking about it. So tell us, you don't have to tell us explicitly about this, Mother, but that's just a perfect lead in, is what do you do to kind of help people, I believe the phrase burn in comes as it's opposite of burn out, right? It's like burning in, it's almost like leaning in or kind of plugging into this piece. But tell us a little bit about what does Burn In Mindset do to help people burn in?
Yeah, so we start by identifying really high-performing schools and then working with the principal. And the principal gives us at least 5 other of her coworkers to work with as well. And the real goal is to get psychological science into the hands of the people who can really use it. And we teach the latest research that's going on at the University of Pennsylvania on high performance and well-being, and give our clients a chance to reflect on what has allowed them to be so successful. What are they implicitly modeling? And then how can they explicitly share that with their students, knowing that culture really is caught instead of taught.
Excellent. And what And so, I imagine you started this, I think 4 years ago. Is that right? So roughly like 2017, 18. Am I getting the timeline right there?
Mm-hmm.
So 2 years before, of course, this like giant pandemic that like caught all of us off guard, is it fair to say, or at least not in the public health
still
world?
is, yeah.
Yes. And we're still grappling with it every day as I'm like, right, exactly. COVID cancellations and all of these pieces. So I think it's really interesting because you kind of have this group of folks that you started this program when it was all the regular stressors of life, which are intense anyway. And then you adding COVID, right, in the pandemic, and kind of, just so many challenges that have kind of emerged in a different way in the last 2 years. And so what are you both like seeing out there as you work with clients and schools and leaders?
I mean, one, despite the headlines, there are absolutely teachers who are burned in and doing incredible work, love going to work every day. So that's one thing. And every day I'm really re-inspired. And the other thing is this willingness to be vulnerable around issues of mental health and race and equity, if it's being facilitated by an expert. And I think that's why Jen's work is so important.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to echo that too. It's like there's this beautiful acknowledgement and holding of both, where it's like, yes, there is difficulty and we are engaged. Like we are not shying away. And we see that time and time again. People, it's not like they're denying the difficulty. They're actually embracing it, but they're not giving up on it. And there is such beauty in that. It's what a lot of people actually often get wrong about positive psychology. They think it's like happyology or overly positive. And it's not actually that. It's embracing the truth of what is here and leveraging strengths and what we have. It's an optimistic perspective as opposed to seeing things as negative and never going to change.
And I think that normalizing the negative is a big part of what Jenn and I are doing with our clients.
Yeah.
And burnout, we have found from our research, is experienced by every single teacher, regardless of how successful you are. And we really think that what we can do to help is help our clients intentionally cultivate the opposite, right? And we also know that bias is normal. Unfortunately, we are all biased. But what are you going to do to address it and to regulate that? And so there's a lot of overlap between our two focuses in burn-in mindset there.
Absolutely.
And so tell us a little bit more, Jenn, about your work with bias. And I would love to start. I know we talked about this idea of there's a lot of chatter out there about bias reduction, and you use a different term, which I think is super interesting, which is bias regulation. So I would love to hear a little bit about that, and then kind of how that really helps people to burn in and how this work intersects together. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work.
Absolutely. So, we hear the term bias reduction, and I am proud to study bias reduction. And I am also quite knowledgeable about what we know from the science and what we do not know. And my, academic mentor, Calvin Lai, has this incredible review paper that I like to say helped land his academic job, where they tested all these wonderful interventions trying to reduce implicit bias, and they didn't work. Or if they did work, they were very short term. And so as I approach my doctoral work, I don't necessarily know if it's the best use of time to keep trying to reduce bias, because one has to wonder, A, is it a possible goal? But B, is it also the goal that would truly measure success? So when people talk about reducing bias, I've heard people, take an implicit association test and say, oh, well, I just want to get the score that says I am not biased, where I don't prefer white or Black people. And it's like, okay, as someone who understands social cognition, what that translates to, and we know this as teachers, they want to get a certain score. They want their timing to be equivalent so that they get a certain score. That does not mean they're not biased. It means they got a certain score. So as you think about even our limitations in how we measure bias, if it's not an implicit association test, it could be self-report, where people are telling you how much they endorse certain things. But we know there is a gap between what we explicitly endorse and what we sometimes do. Bias incorporates 3 domains: stereotypes, which are thoughts we have about other groups; prejudices, which are the emotions we might feel and not even realize it. It's like, oh, I just had a bad feeling about him. Or it's discrimination. And those are the behaviors that we do towards different groups. Crossing the street and not realizing why you cross the street. Those 3 things encompass what we call bias. And yes, my work focuses on racial bias, but it could be gender bias. It could be weight bias. It could be any sort of whenever we group other people. And so I have shifted my focus from bias reduction, just trying to lower it, to bias regulation. How do you monitor it? How do you stay aware of it? And how do you stay engaged? Using the example of weight loss, because that is something a lot of people struggle with and might understand, you might want to reduce your weight. But if you don't maintain the healthy habits that got you to that reduced weight, that regulation, then you're going to be on this yo-yo back and forth. And so I'm much more interested in the ongoing maintenance, because I don't want people to think, oh, we just get to a certain threshold and we're done. I don't think it's that simple. These are institutions that have been ingrained in our society, unfortunately, for quite some time. And so we take a much more interactive, engaged, forward approach than just, let's check this off and get it done.
It's super interesting. And it's interesting to hear you break them down and think about the role of this. And I think, I think earlier, Julia, you made a point to this idea of like, look, we're all human. We all have bias, right? Like, we're not changing the humanity anytime soon. Like, how do we recognize and know, right? And have this awareness. And then I see how when leaders have this, how they can lead so much, when they have this awareness, they can lead so much more effectively. They can engage with others in a more genuine way. They can do this. And when they aren't, it's
paralyzed.
Watching someone blindfolded, right? Yeah, it's and it's like, oh my God, please just sit down. We need you to go to work on yourself, and then maybe you can try again, maybe. So yeah, I think it has a real impact. So I know we've got a timeline, so I do want to get to our lightning round, because I know people love listening to all these recommendations. So I'm going to ask a question and then have each of you answer. And so I'm going to start with, I was a reading teacher, and so I always start with, what is a book that has meant a lot to you professionally that you would recommend?
A book I love right now is How Women Rise by Sally Helgeson and Marshall Goldsmith.
Gosh, can I give 2? One that I
there's no word limit on this essay question.
Thank you so much. I love books too. I was also an English teacher. So the biggest one that impacted my work has to be Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and really understanding that we can break these dynamics of this oppressive dynamic when we see ourselves as both the student and the teacher in any situation. But honestly, the book that I cannot stop reading is a book by therapist Lori Gottlieb, which is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone.
Oh, I've heard good things about that. Yeah.
I cannot recommend it enough. I literally have been giving it to people. Like, I keep extra copies to give to people that I know, because I just think it is such a powerful exploration of what it means to be human, and how we might think that the things that make us distinct actually make us connected. And it's just a beautiful examples of stories and humanity that I think everyone should read.
Jen, I have never heard you recommend that book. I want to read it.
I know, it's very, very glowing endorsement. I have read like a million reviews. I've been like, I should check it out. I'm a big fan of therapy, but Jen, I think you just seal that. I'm like, all right, Chicago Public Library, here I come This is a must read on the list now. So
that was a really good, in my classroom, we call these booked blessings. Those are very, very good book blessings right there.
Exactly. That was very,
I just really order this underneath the table right now.
It's going to be out of the library for the next 6 months. So now we all feel strongly about books, but there are other resources that people learn through. And I acknowledge that, right? Like TED Talks and podcasts and websites. And so is there another resource that's been really impactful for you in your leadership?
I'm just going to piggyback on the recommendation I just gave more about, I think the more you get to know yourself and, the story Julia shared earlier about, I need to sleep on this. These are the kinds of self-knowledge and self-awareness that are truly invaluable. And one podcast that does an excellent job of asking great questions is this podcast called The Real Question. And I found it randomly because they used to host this podcast called Harry Potter as the Sacred Text. And I would listen to it after work, like as a teacher, and it would just be this, they would analyze Harry Potter through like a religious literary and neither one of them are religious. They just went to divinity school. So it was fascinating. But they started this podcast called The Real Question. And they just come on with a real question, like a real dilemma. And they bring two sources, like it could be a song or an excerpt. And they use these things to figure out basically more questions, but hopefully lead them to some sort of way forward. And I just find it to be a fascinating way to step out of yourself and into a different experience, particularly if you're feeling activated or stressed or something like that.
Interesting. And kind of that Harry Potter one. I'm like, I feel like my 10-year-old daughter would really.
I'll tell you right now, your 10-year-old daughter would love it. I love it as a full adult. So
Exactly. That's perfect. How about you, Julia?
I think I just pulled this out. This is the article I'm recommending to everyone. So it's called Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. And the argument that he makes is that the common trait among excellent leaders is that they know themselves really well. And they know their strengths. They know how they like to learn. They know how they collaborate and what their values are and where they can make the greatest contribution. And I think that's something that I've seen from our clients with Burn In Mindset. They are all so different and so unique, but they have figured out how to optimize their strengths in their school. And so this article really resonates with long-term high-performing educators.
Oh, that is, and as a leadership coach, I love that because I think that is always about continuously knowing and learning yourself as well. How about some mentors who you know from your life personally who've meant a lot to you? Tell us about your mentors.
I'll start. This is a beautiful, hard question for me because I feel particularly blessed to have had so many people pour into my life for different time periods and different stages. But two that come to mind, particularly based on what we've been talking about today. The first is Angela Duckworth. Julie and I met her as students. And she is one of those people where once you know her and work with her, she makes herself available to you. And one of the beautiful things that I take and learn from her is the first is it's never too late, right? Like just keep going. But also purpose isn't discovered as much as it's developed. I can't emphasize enough how the unfolding of your purpose can reinforce your deepest values and keep you this sustained energy, particularly for long-term goals. The second is Dr. Brene Brown. Sometimes you hear these notions of like, never meet your heroes, right? Like they can never live up to what you have in your head. No. There are some heroes you can absolutely meet and they will exceed your wildest expectations. She is truly embodied courage, humility, vulnerability. And I'll never forget one of the greatest things she said to me, even I had to say no to something that she offered. And when I explained to her why I was saying no, and she forgot about her own feelings and offered me this beautiful notion of like, what I am creating space for is what the world actually needs. It was this beautiful affirmation of my values and stepping outside of yourself for, this, for people to really live into their own values.
You doubled down.
I doubled down, and it was this beautiful notion of like, no, keep doubling down, because that's what the world needs.
Where you're doubling down meets the needs of the world to make it a more humane and just place. That's wonderful.
Beth, I wasn't going to say this, but what you just said made me think of it. So I can share some other mentors, but my number one mentor is my mom, and she died of ALS in 2020 before the pandemic. And there were 800 people at her funeral, and so many women, like 30 women, who say that she's her best friend. So she just modeled the importance of relationships being the most important thing. And then also she always said to us growing up, find your gifts, accept what you were given, what you were not, and use them to make a difference in the world. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to do with Burn-In Mindset, and definitely what I'm trying to help our clients do. And then what we're always trying to help our students with. And Angela Duckworth, I will say, is definitely someone who I look to as, she is a expert in one small area. She has stayed in her lane, and she's an exceptional writer, and she's very clear and concise. And anytime I write, I remember her saying, a 3-word sentence is good, a 2-word sentence is better. And so I think of that. And I also think of one of the directors of the program at the University of Pennsylvania, Leona Brandwein, is an extremely compassionate leader, but she has very high expectations of the people who work with her. And I think it's really hard to have both of those things as a leader. And I've just watched over the years very busy, very successful people bend over backwards to work on her team because they trust her. And I think part of why they trust her is because she's transparent, and she also keeps things in confidence. And I really respect that and try to emulate that. And then another, Beth, would be you and Sarah Baxendale. You both did a remarkable job of cultivating a team of people and then helping us build like an intense sense of camaraderie and purpose. And I think that's incredible. So those would be the three people plus my mom.
Well, that is very kind. Thank you. It is shocking that it was 11 years ago. So that is the part I'm still chewing on. Cause I'm like, but that was just last summer, Julia. So of course.
And I still think about you all the time and your crazy analogies and how terrified I was to walk past you because you would always be like so exacting on time management. So yeah, I showed up 5 minutes early to this.
Well, I would say too. So that actually leads me. I do use the crazy story tool often as a teacher. And as a facilitator. So you were subjected to some of that. But that brings me to the next question naturally, which is you, of course, Julia, know that I have many leadership mentors from afar. So people I look to and learn about leadership, but I'm not friends with yet. And you're no Jen on this, that forget about what I said about never meeting your heroes is like, your lips to God's ears, I will one day meet Bruce Springsteen. And I just know we will be the best friends we are destined to be because I learned so much on leadership watching The Boss. So I would love to know if there are any mentors from afar who maybe you don't know yet, but who have helped shape your understanding of leadership.
Oh, Beth, I have to hop in on this one. Oprah freaking Winfrey. I saw her live right before the pandemic hit in 2020. And it's so interesting, you know, we've been talking about making these really life-changing calls, like life trajectory calls. And I flew from my interview, my PhD interview at the university where I am now, straight to Brooklyn. And I was living in Philly at the time, working at Wharton. And I was a little bit late and I walked in and I had the best interview. And I was like, I was still waiting to hear back from Harvard Business School. And I knew I wanted to be a psychologist. And I knew getting a PhD at a business school wouldn't quite get me there. But I thought, who turns down Harvard? And I remember sitting in that huge auditorium and I was listening to Oprah talk about living the life you want. And this was before I heard back from WashU. Like, I didn't know if I just knew that that was where I was supposed to be. And in that auditorium, I withdrew my application from Harvard.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Wow.
Yep. It was this amazing, amazing opportunity where I was like, double down, you know where you're supposed to be. And so I did. And it's the best decision. I mean, I don't know what the other decision would have led to, right? But I like to say the best decisions are the ones you actually make. So it's the best decision I could have made.
That's amazing. That's a great one. Julia, anyone come to mind for you?
I don't know if it falls under leadership, but someone who I read, like actually read her full bulletin, is Esther Perel. I read her books. And I think relationships and marriage require leadership. So I think she fits under the category.
100%. 100%.
Could not agree more.
So
Good.
I know we're getting really tight on time. So really quick, tell me one thing in your life you are just loving now. It can be anything. One thing you're loving in your life.
I am loving cooking. I have been obsessed with Stanley Tucci, Searching for Italy, and he's been dropping one episode at a time this week. And I have been enjoying nothing more than taking time away, going to a farmer's market, looking up actual recipes and recipe books, chopping, like just listening to a podcast. It has been life, because this past semester I defended my master's. It was very stressful, and just carving out the time each week. And it wasn't like I was meal prepping, or like, it was actually like one meal that I love, that I've always wanted to cook, and it's been magnificent. So loving all things food related, travel related, escape, but also bringing it into your home has been so beautiful for me.
That's amazing. Julia, how about you?
My children. I have had 2 babies in the last 2 years. And so my son is 18 months and my daughter's 3 months old, and she spit up yesterday on the floor. And I said to Wilder, well, before I cleaned it up, I was like, what's this? What just happened? And he goes, uh-oh, Coco, which is our daughter's name is Charlotte, but he says Coco. And it was so adorable. So I'm just loving them and being a new mom.
Awesome. And I'm sure you are fantastic. Well, let me thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to put the website up, and then for those of you watching the video, and if you're at home or listening to a podcast, it's burninmindset.com. And Julia, what should people know about going to the website, or how they can learn more about the amazing work you're doing?
Yes, please visit our website, and we can set you up with a 30-minute consultation with either me or Jen. So just fill out your information and we will get back to you, and we will teach you lots of things, positive psychology, and help you stay burned into this sacred profession.
I just think it pays off in droves. So that is fantastic. And if you like listening to this and want to know about other leaders that we talk to or other lessons on leaderships, please go to my website at bethnapleton.com, where you'll find lots of goodies and a refresher coming soon with some videos and resources and other things leaderships. And when you get there, it'll pop up if you want to join my newsletter. That's really the best way to stay in touch. And I would love if you did that or followed me on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, so we can keep this leadership conversation going. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I love getting to talk. I wish we could just keep going, but I feel like we just might have to do a round 2 at some point. And just so appreciate all the work you guys are doing to retain top talent in education and help keep culture strong. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Beth.